thank you everyone and welcome to Sydney Design Thinking number 80. It's pretty exciting for us. It's community-based design. Tonight we have an awesome event and a whole bunch of experts. You'll get to ask a lot of questions too. But before we kick off, we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of this land, the elders past, present and emerging of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And when we talk about respect, right, we mean this. We mean this because it's crucial, not just for the Indigenous people, but for all peoples, right? And it's really vital that us as designers, design thinkers, right, we go into different communities. We go and we look at changing systems, processes, behaviours, updating, who's worked in the government? Who's done their time? Yeah, right, okay, all right. Who's worked for, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other ones where it definitely feels like doing time. But we go in and we change things. And we can do that. We do that nationally. Some people have had the fortune and the privilege of being able to do that internationally as well, like our experts tonight. And we've got to think about, like, when we're changing things, like, is it actually useful for our people, for the people that we're changing things for? Does it actually respect them? And then on top of that, we've got to make sure that we're earning their respect. We have to show that we're listening and honouring them. And then we've got to think about, on top of that, like, who's got access to what it is that we're doing? Because if you're making a system or a process for especially bigger organizations, especially places like governments, you know, for the individuals on the ground who that's impacting, do they get an opt-out of that? What happens if they don't want it? What happens if it's detrimental? There's lots of things that have been designed. Australia's, history with its White Australia policy, that was a policy of racism. Look at Nazi Germany. What do you think that was? That was designed. Right? So we've got to think about the impact that we have. Can people opt in? Can they opt out? What type of impact is it going to have on them? And again, if we think about, like, access, what does access even mean? Right? I think there's so many people you hear about saying, oh, well, access, someone doesn't have access to something, so we'll make it digital. Which is great, except like if you're in Australia and the internet drops out every time it rains, right? Or what happens when you don't have internet at all? What happens when you don't have a computer or a phone? How accessible is something? How much of a solution is that? And, a lot of people in Australia, they do have internet, they do have computers, but a lot also don't. And Australia is a rich country. So what happens when we go and look at countries which aren't rich? Again, what does access mean? And if you look at the so-called most successful people in the world, it's not so much, their success is not so much defined by them, it's defined by what they had access to, right? And that's true of even Elon Musk, even if he did have access to somehow magically buy Twitter and screw the whole thing over. But that is different. So tonight I'm super excited because we're going to be introducing a range of speakers here tonight. We also have a few really awesome announcements that will be coming at the end. And as always, we have not forgotten our tradition of continuing the conversation at the pub. We do have a new location, which will be the Dove and Olive. Excellent.
Follow Kylie.
And we'd also like to do, again, another big thank you and kind of a celebration because ThinkPlace has, they've come together to partner with us and offer us ongoing support, which means our community can be alive, can thrive, and have all of you wonderful people here. And if there's anything that you guys want to learn more about, you guys should come and speak to us, the organisers, who I'll point out in a moment, and tell us who it is that you want to hear from and what you want to hear about. But big thank you to ThinkPlace and and whatever just happened there. And you know us, I think, in terms of your organisers. So we have, where is she? Where's Kate? Kate Linton, there she is. We have Ben Bougainville, we have Kylie, Mageropoulos, and Lucas is MIA. He's okay. Community base, that's good. We're on it. That's something. And me, you guys have typically known me as Zoe Raisin, but those of you here last month will know I got sprung and eloped. So I'm now officially Zoe Gibson. My friend's night was here because I love you guys so much.
Big announcement number one.
That wasn't even planned. But kicking off for tonight, I'm not actually sure whose slide this is. Oh no, we do. We have names. But we have our lovely speakers here. So we have Rohan, Doherty, Jennifer McBride, and Bill, Bannear, and Lee Cooper. Wonderful. So thank you so much for agreeing. We can even have a chat.
I think you're going to do the intro.
Hey, you guys.
Okay, Lee, do you want to do the intro? We're kicking off with Oh, hey, Brenton, did you want to do the intro? Hi. Okay, I'll do an intro, guys. And now a message from our sponsors.
And so you know, that's the camera.
Okay, cool. Hi. So my name is Brenton. I'm the General Manager here at ThinkPlace, New South Wales. So we're a strategic design agency. We work for the public good, as I said up there. So no, we align all our projects to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We started originally in Canberra about 18 years ago. We've now got offices all over the world, including Kenya, US, UK, Ethiopia, Senegal, 4 in Australia, Singapore. So yeah, and look, we're really excited to help out Sydney Design Thinking. We think this is a great community, and it's just a real privilege to be able to, you know, help out the community in whichever way we can.
Thank you. And just to add on, I think this guys will highlight here why we chose to partner with these guys with what they're going to show you tonight. So I'm super excited.
So I think we'll introduce ourselves as we each speak, but maybe Lee, I'll hand over to you. Do you want to kick us off?
Yep, I will. So mine is, community-based design. We made this up last week. Like anything in design, you come up with it and just put the word design at the end. And it's a new practice. But it came about from us in terms of how we were working in communities and with communities. And in a sense, I use it more as a philosophy rather than an approach or a specific thing you do. And the quote out there, that quality about a name, which some may or may not know, is really from Christopher Alexander, talking about the ability to go into a space and you kind of know that room or that space is got something or hasn't got something. You can't directly create it, it just works. And in a sense, it's an emergent process. It's not, you almost do something in order for that to happen as a byproduct. And in a sense, the first idea about this is we don't go in with this approach outlined on what we're going to do. I mean, we kind of do when we win the bid, but then we kind of change it as we go. And it's in the sense of going, well, how might we respond to the community and do things that in order to do something else that gives us the results that we were also looking for. And you kind of move away from a workshop and move to a place of where it starts that conversation and it emerges from there. Yes, and so I think I'm talking on a project first, which is around the project in Walgett, around cultural and community hubs. I've got a, well, this works will be excellent. This is a little video I want to quickly play.
My name is Gary Trindle, and a Gamilla man. Well, actually, I'm a Gamilla man from the Nation. Gamilla people go down around Ringai, back up around Thames, back up under the Queensland border, back down to Colorado, Bryan, down to Walgett. Cuts off just this side of Bannear. That's our nation. We had 17 years with the New South Wales Police here in Walgett. We had 14 years with the Aboriginal Legal Service here in Walgett. And in the main travel quickly all over Australia, working can't get around sport and that sort of stuff. So come with a little bit of experience, and I'd just like to talk today on some of the artifacts and that I've acquired over the time, and some of the cultural knowledge that I know. I'm 67-year-old and still learning my cultures, but I'm trying to put the video what I know about my culture and stand about it.
So when we talk about what that's Gary. So Gary was the an Indigenous leader from the Walgett community who, in a sense, was the designer. And we were his helpers, and he was the person that enabled what we did to happen. And it was amazing. And I guess when you think about Walgett, you talk about obviously high rate of Indigenous unemployment, low rates of school, all the issues and the problems. And it's got this bit of a juxtaposition of you drive in and it's like the welfare street. It's got mission, and these are all next to each other. It's got boarded up windows, broken, so you can't throw rocks through them which kind of then says the design, this is a dangerous place. And yet, on the other hand, there's also this beauty about it as well. It's this juxtaposition of this amazing space, as well as an area that is not as welcoming. And I think Jen, who was on the project with me, described it in a way that I think best sums it up, which you can share. But Jen, I knew that in the report, so this Jen did describe it in a really as a way that I really liked, and is that it's a place that if you just look on the outside, you miss its hidden beauty and resilience, and you miss someone like Gary. You don't get to meet or see him, and that's what one of the strengths that we had in this project was basically not going there and doing a workshop and coming back out, or doing a couple of workshops. We moved up there for 4 weeks pretty much and lived there for 4 weeks, and it was a way that the immersing experience is how we learned what we needed to understand to answer the brief, but also how could we learn the process of design with this community in order for them to design and experience the solutions in which this has to thrive. It's no good having a great idea that has to be planted in an area that's just got no ability to connect, or they don't have the relationships to begin with. And you try to go, what's the education strategy? Well, you've got 3 people who complete year 12. I don't think that's the place where we need to start. I mean, there's something before that. And so we started off with our challenge of pools, and we looked at this idea of I love pulling things from other areas. So our idea was, or our approach was, influenced a bit by this reading in Harvard Business Review about brand communities, and it talks about pools, hubs, and networks, and it talked about how that is in a branding sense. But the idea being a pool, we will share something in common, but we don't know each other. So, for example, use this space here. Say, I'm new here. We all come from a design background, but we might not have a strong relationship, a social connection. Then, through a hub, such as this community, we create something that people can belong to. And then after that, hopefully people leave and have a connection that is now not completely attached to that hub, but it's actually connected to the social and personal relationships that we have, and what then builds out of that network. And so that was the idea where we started off with this idea of pools. Everyone in Walgett agreed we wanted a better place. But even that alone actually was divisive, because what your version of a better place and my version don't connect, and therefore your way is wrong and I'm right, and now we're enemies. And it's like, well, you're in furious agreement, but yet you have no connection. So we had this place-based part where we used, we created a hub, basically a cultural and community pop-up hub. So we found a vacant social enterprise, of which we tidied up, and basically said, okay, the idea of connecting in this place is just not going to happen. Like there was actually no spaces to connect that weren't a welfare agency or a pub, actually. No, a pub. There was like a sports and community club or the RSL. And so people wouldn't go to different agencies because I won't go to that space and they won't go to that space. And so we found this vacated social enterprise and found out who owned it and said, what's what we're going to do? Come and take the space. Gary, who also was interested in opening up, wanting a cultural centre for Walgett, and we said, okay, well, what do you reckon about us if we do a cultural and community pop-up? And so we'll test and prototype a cultural centre as a way to understand what the community needs in terms of this other project and understand, and we can prototype what happens in that space and see what emerges from that area. And so, you know, Gary provided the mob legitimacy that we needed in that space. And we were there basically as flies in the wall and just basically responding to the opportunities as they emerged. And we did not know what they were from one day to the next day, hence why you had to live up there. And that became the space on how we prototyped. And so the hub, and it actually was a physical hub, but it can also be quite, you know, a hub could be a collection or a group or a project of why you connect to people. It became the thing that brought people together. The most important thing that was owned by no one but shared by everyone. Because the idea was we needed to move away from this space that is owned by someone and excluding someone else. And Walgett is divided along those lines. It's divided from town to the old missions of Ginji and Namoy, and therefore you've got people who see themselves as those three different tribes. And this is what kind of happened when we took over the space. Now, we had a opportunity where, so you saw mentor and mentorship. So one of the things that they were talking about is, oh, there's no one, we need mentors involved. There's no one here that's mentoring. We're great if some people could mentor. Well, there's a young girl there, Felicity. She's 16, 17, yeah, 16. And she was teaching the other young tackers how to do weaving. You had Frank, a local artist who's showing the kids and doing artwork. And it's kind of going, yeah, actually, it's not that you don't have that. It's we're not connected into it. You can see here an enterprise. So we just had a lot of Frank's artwork there. And those two couple came in. They were looking for, as the guy said, I was looking for a place to take a piss and buy some coffee. And that's basically what you'd do in Walgett. They spent an hour there chatting with Frank. They ended up buying $300 worth of art. Now, that, in a sense, it starts to prove to us that, hey, there's interest here. It's not it doesn't need to be a survey. It's actually happening. We've got we had a community dinner night where we opened up and we thought, oh, let people come in, hear a bit about it and leave. They came in, dropped anchor and stayed the whole night. We had old fellas, young fellas, we had black, white, we had in town, we had grey nomads, we had school teachers. These are people that would not sit and talk to each other, walk past on the street, all being in that space together, just chatting away. And what it was a community dinner that was put on by Gary and his family and just opened the doors. We didn't design, and what happened on that night, we had a young girl come down and she talked about going, oh, look, I need to, I'll go do Are You OK Day for a week and I want to practice my speech, what I have to do there. Can I do it here tonight? I said, yes, okay. So she, in front of a room, maybe 30 people, sung her song about, in front of everyone, that gave her story about how her brother committed suicide, her abuse and her journey in her mental health space and where she is now and what she's hoping to do. She held the whole room in everyone's hand and everyone was listening to her. You couldn't design for that to happen. But what we could do, and go back to that idea of probably that name, you create the space and the conditions for something good to happen, something magical to happen, and it will. And from that, we go, well, what does that tell us about in terms of our project? And that's how, I guess, that idea of that web space. So, we bring people together for that specific purpose. And the nice thing about staying there, we could actually see what happened afterwards. So we saw relationships, and Gary's a great one too, who Gary and the person who ran the PCYC never spoke to each other. They did not like each other. They had all manner of reasons to not like each other. But for some reason, there was just this, you don't support black fellas and you don't like us white fellas. And they came to the hub together one day and for the first time had a conversation. A week later, we're going to another meeting together and Gary goes, you never believe this. I was down at the bloody PCYC the other day and we're talking about getting a boxing group up and going there. Then he goes, we go into this meeting with council and a group of other services and Gary goes, you never believe this. Tells the story to the group. And then the guy from General Justice goes, I reckon I can get the gloves that you need and the pads and the mitts you need. And at the end, they talk about, at the end of the meeting, go, geez, we've had this conversation 6 months ago. And so in a normal project, we would never have seen that. We would have never seen the value add happen because we wouldn't be there. We've done the workshop and disappeared. But now we can pick up, hey, look, this approach is showing some sustainable change beyond the immediate impact. There's a secondary impact in that space. That's about it. Oh, yeah. And so since then, we have the project has continued on. And so we left, we have funded the space for 6 more months. And They've been running it as a community centre voluntarily. They've used it during the floods as a relief centre and for community aid, and have continued the work since our original intervention there. And so, in a sense, that hub is still continuing on and it's still building webs and to this day. Jen?
I think for me, it was especially like Walgett in the media had such a negative, had lots of like negative stories. And when we were there, like initially, I think people almost like internalized that negativity of the place. Whereas multiple people said to us throughout the time, like, oh, it's so great to see good things happen in Walgett. And it kind of gave the opportunity to be able to change the narrative around how the community is engaging with each other and how they're perceived by other parts of Australia as well. Yeah.
That's yes.
I think I'm up.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, folks. So before I speak to the project I'm going to talk about, it's probably just worth sort of tapping into where these guys just left off. I think what we're finding increasingly, it's a really obvious point, but we're in the business of creating relationships. And if you can create those relationships, it actually creates the affordances for good stuff to happen. So as a designer, I think it can be a bit of a challenge to some of the ways that we're trained, where we think that we're designing the solution. But I think in this case, actually, it's not. We're designing the opportunities and designing for relationships to form, which then supports the emergence of the stuff that we want to see. And I think for those of us involved in systems change, that's a pretty important kind of mantra for what we're doing these days. So I'm going to talk to this project that we ran in Singapore. So I've spent the last 4.5 years in Singapore running the ThinkPlace business over there. And I've come back to Sydney mainly for grandparents and childcare now. So I'm sort of fresh and new to Sydney, so it's nice to meet some people. But I'm now running a practice that's dedicated towards how you facilitate for groups of people to come together for design, big ecosystem level design. And the challenge is usually that you've got lots of different disciplines and knowledge base and expertise involved, and they don't work well together. So the art's less about design and more about getting people to work together well. So it's kind of more like a scrum master than your lead designer in a way is kind of the role I'm now inhabiting. So this project, the Alliance for Action for Lower Wage Workers. So Singapore, when COVID hit, pivoted to a model called the Alliance for Action, where they realised that to do a lot of what they wanted to achieve, they needed to bring people together and do this sort of systems level whole of society design work. And they hadn't done much of that before, so it was pretty novel. Singapore comes from a fairly autocratic background, and still to this day, they've had one-party rule for 50 years. So there is a lot of democratic action that happens there, but it looks and feels very different to what we would consider to be a democratic system with a change of government regularly. It's also novel because it's a city-state and it's got one level of government, which makes it a really interesting place to do design work, much easier to bring together systems there. So this project was around how to get more public support for lower wage work in Singapore. Singapore is very hierarchical. It's quite status conscious. Therefore, a lot of society looks down on people who are in low wage work. The lowest wage work is actually outsourced to foreign workers, and they have, out of the 5 million people in the city, 1 million are actually foreign workers who are the cleaners, the security guards, inhabiting construction roles. This project was aimed more at local low wage workers, but they were looking at 4 things that we've been asked to look at. The first was, how can we strengthen respect and appreciation for low wage work from the Singapore public? How can we foster supportive working environments for low wage workers to thrive? How can we encourage support for a progressive wage model that had been newly introduced? And how can we increase support for and returns from upskilling? What was interesting is these frames were given to us at the outset of the project. We suggested co-designing them with the members of the Alliance. They weren't ready for that yet, but that was the first round. The second round, they did allow the group to take up and frame things for themselves. And they've been progressively handing over more and more responsibility, both as the government gets comfortable with devolving power to the group, and the group gets more comfortable with the role that they're inhabiting. What we were trying to do is really connect together a number of voices. So we were really trying to create a network that allowed for more of these solutions, design and action to happen. So we were trying to link together people who really gave a shit, people who were really passionate about this issue and wanted to do something, who had that driving force. We were connecting them with the voice of experience, so people who were low wage workers or were working in that system or were potentially affected and stakeholders involved. with capability, which we talked about, people with resources, money, labour, volunteer time, people with specialist knowledge, skill sets, and people with access to workspaces, like employers, for example, coming together with designers who are helping to broker, facilitate, and coordinate, people who could play the connector role to connect together diverse communities and people who don't always talk, and people who could actually represent and document what was going on so that the group could sort of track what they were doing. I won't go into too much detail because I suspect we're going to run out of time. So long story short, we went through an approach that if you want to know more about, come and talk to me, but it focused really heavily on coming up with some initiatives that they wanted to run and then prototyping them really quickly. It ran over 6 months. We basically had a workshop every month acting as a sort of bookend or a milestone where we actually trained up the groups in the next stage of the design process, heavily focusing on prototyping, testing, just getting comfortable with getting their ideas out to the people they were actually designing for and with quickly while it was still rough, which was a pretty alien behavior to a lot of them. So that was really what we were focusing on. By the end of it, we were getting collective review so they could look at everything that they'd achieved, what they'd learnt, and actually framing for the next group who was to come beyond them, and also showcasing, so connecting them with scaling partners who could come in and take some of those ideas, take them on board. And we had a few of those ideas where that actually did go to fruition. So this is just some visuals. We had some quite beautiful venues that we were able to use, courtesy of the government sponsoring it. We also had, this was all when COVID hit, so we kept going flip-flopping back and forth from, this is the first workshop, which happened just as things were starting to relax, and then Delta happened, and then everything went back virtual again. And then by the end of it, we could meet, but we all had to stay a metre away from each other in our workshops, which causes all sorts of connections when you're trying to design interactive exercises, but I'm sure you will live that experience yourselves. This guy, that's the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Manpower, which is their Labour Ministry. It was really interesting so we talk about this action network, and so they wanted to come in and, you know, the cynical view is they were coming in for a photo op. But we got to brief them, and we had sort of full latitude from our sponsors to give our opinion to them. We said, look, please come in here with the view that you're part of this network and you're trying to help create these opportunities too. The best thing you can do is open your little black books and hook people up. Because the main thing that made a difference in this was knowing people who could help you do what you wanted to do. It was all about that. Things seem really hard and difficult to do until you find the person who knows how to do it. Or knows the right kind of people who can make it happen. And then it becomes easier. So this whole thing is about making this stuff easier to do through establishing those connections. And actually the minister started WhatsApping the groups after the session and hooking them up with people and the town council employers. And that actually had a real effect. It made a big difference to what the group could achieve. I don't know if we'd see that in Australia. I hope we do. It's interesting how close a lot of this is in Singapore. Another big factor was we got a lot of good press. So the other effect of having these VIPs in the session was that it got press, which actually gave prestige and a bit of energy and enthusiasm to the participants, because they're all volunteers, right? So 6 months of sustained effort and work beyond their day job as volunteers. How do you sustain that energy? The PR and the sort of boost that they got from seeing their work out there, I think made a difference. And actually the results were reported by the Prime Minister in the National Day address. So, you know, people were sort of taking it seriously, what they were doing. And that had a big effect in actually galvanizing the groups to give their all to do it. Also scared them shitless because they knew that they were going to have to report to the Deputy Prime Minister at some point. And so that kind of spurred a bit of action and urgency to what they were doing. So in terms of some of the things that they came up with, this group created a handbook for how to create a rest area for your staff. So a lot of employment locations didn't actually have a place where people could stop, rest and have a meal. So you have this effect in Singapore malls where the staff are all sitting in the toilets on their mobile phones because they don't have a place where they can go and have a canteen rest break. So this group was looking at how to teach employers how to create a cost-effective space that they'd be encouraged to do. This group was creating a digital app that allowed feedback between managers and employees in a sort of anonymised, safe way that could drive a better quality discussion around conditions. This group actually ran and mounted an advertising campaign in support of the low wage, progressive wage model. And this group ran an interactive experience for children to meet their everyday heroes around them. which they actually did online because it was in the middle of COVID still, which probably wasn't as effective as it could be. But it was still pretty cool. They had like this MC hosting it, and they had sort of this class of kids who joined and kind of met their local cleaner and had this really engaging session with them. So they tried a bunch of things. At the end of it all, we actually got them to kind of put it all together and say, we've all been trying different things. What actually are we working on? So we got them to reframe the challenge at the end of the process and created this sort of big wall map that we then kind of used as the basis for the next round. And we're actually into the third round now. We've changed the form of it a little bit each time. This one was very heavily handheld. So it was a workshop every month to kind of goad people to kind of get to the next stage. We kind of went to a model that was more a couple of initial events to kind of get people started and form teams. And then we went to like a coaching and problem solving mode where they could call on us as they needed advice on what to do next, how to do it. If they got stuck, they could call us in to kind of help out. And the ministry actually played a role. Like Singapore works off WhatsApp groups. So everything happens in WhatsApp groups. If you want action, you form a WhatsApp group about it and you communicate in it. So we had all these WhatsApp groups running, which is not great for work-life balance, I will say, but Singapore's just not a great place for work-life balance. So that's just the territory. We had a microsite where we kind of reported on this stuff, and that's live and continues to report on the action. We were trying to achieve a snowball effect with that initial group that was kind of handpicked and not exactly, it was a bit curated by the government. That then got progressively relaxed and more people got drawn in through the press and the action to kind of grow the network over time and to rejuvenate it as well. So we got drop off at the end of each round, but we got new people coming in as well. We had some of the initiatives kind of continue to grow and scale with other new ones starting along the way. And that's me. Thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rohan Doherty. I lead ThinkPlace Australia's international development portfolio of work. So all of my work actually is outside of Australia, mostly in the Pacific region and Papua New Guinea and a little bit of Indonesia. Mostly our clients are the United Nations and United Nations agencies. So I'm going to talk about one of those projects today. So start of last year, we were engaged by United Nations Development Program to design a entrepreneurship training course for Bougainville, for young people in Bougainville. So working for me. Yeah. Bougainville is an interesting place. For those who don't know about it, so good.
No, it's the computer.
Next slide.
Control Italy.
Not changing anymore? Nope. That's right. Keep talking.
So it's a autonomous region of Papua New Guinea. It's interesting because actually a couple of years ago there was 2019 now actually, there was a referendum in Bougainville where 97% of the population voted to become independent of Papua New Guinea. So that's scheduled to happen in 2027. It may or may not happen depending on the powers that be, but that puts in a really unique position. It's essentially going to be the newest country in the world. So there's a lot of development funding and interest in Bougainville because a new country in the Pacific is strategically located. It's potentially unstable. It can have big ramifications for the whole region. There's a lot of a lot of investment and development money going into Bougainville, and that's where this project comes in. The idea behind it, UNDP's thinking is that let's invest in entrepreneurs so that when the country becomes independent, it's got a self-sustaining economy. At the moment, the country or Bougainville has a long way to go before it's actually able to generate enough of an economy to sustain itself. So interesting context for as a country. So yeah, we were brought in to develop an entrepreneurship training course that would be delivered to predominantly women and young people, but open to everyone. who's interested, but delivered to people in the three sort of main towns in Bougainville. And UNDP simultaneously would be setting up these innovation hubs which would, imagine a classroom where this sort of training could happen, a space to bring people together for this sort of training. Takes a long time to get buildings built in Bougainville, so those actually haven't been built yet, but it's still happening. But at any rate, we could design the training course and get that started and I guess get that rolling. So ThinkPlace was brought in as sort of the experts in entrepreneurship, and the idea was that we would create the curriculum and all of the training materials and everything that the trainers would need, and essentially hand that over to local trainers who would then go and deliver it, which I think makes sense. As foreigners, I actually think we don't really have a place to, local trainers will be able to connect with the community at a far greater capacity than we can. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, for local trainers to be leading the actual delivery of it. To start the work, though, what we proposed was that we need to do what we called a needs assessment trip, but essentially, we needed to connect with the communities that would be benefiting or receiving this training, to understand where are they coming from, where are they up to, where do we need this training to connect. So we travelled to Bougainville and had a week there. And the idea of this needs assessment trip was that we needed to, I guess, understand what sort of how are people thinking about entrepreneurship to begin with, and what sort of capacities, what sort of training will they need to receive. I guess some more context is that there's been, you might have heard about the Panguna mines in Bougainville. So extremely large mine 20 years ago that caused a lot of warfare in the country. And it actually meant that for a long period, there was essentially no schooling happening in Bougainville. So you've got this big generation of people who never went to school. So I guess that was also underpinning our needs assessments. We needed to understand the education levels that people would be coming from, recognizing that someone who hasn't been to school can still be a very good entrepreneur, but that does have a lot of implications for the training course and how we actually how we sort of deliver that training course. So we talked with a whole lot of people. We sort of went to Booker with very little plan. We sort of knew we need to understand the context of entrepreneurship in the country, but we had very little plan. We sort of rocked up and just wanted to meet people and talk to people and get to know the community. So we met. So one story I can share. We were introduced to a lady who was incredibly humble, and she told us her story, which was basically that she started collecting cans that she could get a cent for, and she saved up enough money from collecting cans to buy a sewing machine, which was what she was really passionate in. And she started sewing clothes for her friends and family. And then she realized that there were a lot of young girls in her community that sort of had nothing to do and were just, languishing. And she started showing them how to sew and how to make clothes. And eventually she was actually selling these clothes, and she had enough money to buy a few more sewing machines. And when we met her, she had 5 sewing machines, I think, and she would bring in these young girls from the community and sort of show them how to make clothes. And they were actually turning a nice little profit. They were able to live off that little hustle. And we said to her, Julie, you realize you're actually you're an entrepreneur. This is actually an incredible story. So no. All I'm trying to do is just help the children in my community and help them to grow. And so it was this really powerful story. And I remember it because she was incredibly humble and didn't think of herself as a business owner. She was just trying to help the people around her. So from that that experience, for example, we learned a few things that would influence this course. I think firstly that there is the desire to, or the sort of hustle, for lack of a better word, to actually go and do things. There was definitely this narrative when we arrived that there's no opportunity in Bougainville. Everyone just sits around, and you don't even have enough money to buy a beer. People just sit around under a tree and just chat and do nothing. And that was sort of this prevailing narrative that we were sort of fed a little bit. But we saw there are actually a lot of examples of people in the community doing really great things. So that was probably the first thing. The second thing we learned from that was that people are not motivated by money necessarily in this community. So pitching like, you can start a business and become wealthy and you can improve your quality of life, that's not actually a selling point for people. But what is if you start a business, actually you can create opportunities for your family, your community, your neighbors, and they can learn and they can be busy and they can be fulfilled. That's actually what was going to drive people. And that's what had driven Julie in this case. So we had a few little conversations like that and met people in the community and heard their stories. We also met with like business owners of legitimate businesses and talked to them about, what sort of opportunities do you see here and what are the challenges really? Like what are the barriers to starting a business? Which was quite a big part of this course as well. It wasn't just how to come up with a value proposition, but it was actually let's get your first $500 funding from Bank of South Pacific and that sort of thing, and actually start up. So we were trying to understand the whole process from having an idea to actually becoming a formal business. We talked to a lot of informal business owners. So sort of like Julie, there were a lot of people who would sell like betel nut or like cigarettes and these sort of things on the side of the road, and just informal business owners. And so they, again, didn't really think of themselves as business owners, but that's what they were. They had supply chains and they had customers, and but they just didn't think about it that way. So and then one requirement we had from the client actually was they, and I think this is probably sort of how the funding works a little bit, but they had a brief we had a brief that to sort of encourage businesses in four industries: fishing, agriculture, cocoa, and tourism, which I guess are sort of the primary industries in these sort of countries. And so, that was another thing we sort of tried to look at what the opportunities are in these industries as well. So identifying the skills and capabilities. We wanted to really make sure that we were getting the right people from the community who would come through these training courses as well. So we were trying to sort of figure out what's the eligibility criteria. And it's not just, you've passed high school or like, I don't know, we wanted it to be more around like you've got some ambition and you've got ideas and some sort of demonstration of initiative, I guess. This like community engagement, I guess, culminated in a workshop that we did with government, where we basically presented, this is what we're hearing from the community. This is how we're thinking we're going to structure this entrepreneurship course. And it was really interesting actually, because it's quite a really small country. It's very, very hierarchical, and so these government workshops were very interesting, where you had the head person would make the final decision and everyone else would talk anyway. It was really interesting dynamics. So we worked through with government, like from your perspective, what do you need this course to do to achieve your sort of your strategy and your policies, and that was useful. I think we sort of heard from them. Actually, we heard from government was that there needs to be a certificate at the end of the course. People need to be qualified at the end of this. And that's fine. We can do that. Yeah. We'll need to use the government printer for some reason. So and I think where we got to at the end of that, like we realized that this entrepreneurship course, it needs to be obviously about entrepreneurship skills, business startup skills, but it actually needs to be a big part of this needs to be about character building and helping these people see that there is so much opportunity around them, and like becoming a new country, they've actually got, you know, potentially more opportunity than many other people around, like most other countries around the world. But it's just helping them to see that they have this opportunity and that they themselves can do it. So this is what it ended up looking like. We developed this course. We trained our trainers and all of the products that they needed, packaged it up. We've so far had 300 students, or almost 300, go through this course. Most of them female, which was really interesting, actually. I think there's actually a lot of men that were unemployed as well, but there's a lot of drive in the women in Bougainville, and they were really engaged and really interested. It was interesting that about a third of the participants were already sort of self-employed. They thought of themselves as business owners, and the rest were either unemployed or I think about 20% were employed, like formally employed. There are a lot of youth, a lot of young people come through, but we actually had a pretty good age range as well from those 300 students. And then a couple of quotes that we've had from people. So, found it interesting. It was different from our usual business trainings, and content to address the mindsets and showcase participants' new creative ways of setting up and running businesses, which that, for me, that was a really nice quote to receive, because that was what we were trying to structure this after meeting people, is that we wanted to help build their mindset as much as the skills that they're building. So, yep, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. That was really amazing, I guess, to hear all of your stories and the work and the impact that that's had on the communities. Few questions from me, and then we'll pass on to you guys. I'm sure you have plenty of questions, and I think Ben's got a couple from the Zoom chat. But I guess just for starters, and look, this will go, I guess, to all of you, so feel free to go first, whoever. But how do you guys really build that trust and engagement with these communities coming into the place, I guess for you two as foreigners, and I guess for you guys as people who aren't a part of that community?
Yeah, going into Walgett particularly, because you went to, even though it wasn't a project that was an Indigenous specific project, at the Indigenous land, it was an Indigenous lands over, and we were very conscious of that, and really there's no other way to do it other than, and we knew we had this short time frame, so the potential to create that connection was really hard. So for us, and we copped a fair bit of our first conversation where we left. We knew how people thought about us.
Yeah.
And pretty clear. And a good thing, but I get it too, right? We're one. We're not. We haven't walked in your space and shoes, and you've been consulted to death. And for us, it was just going in and Gary, and he gave me a hard time that first time, and I flew up there to meet him, and I said, he goes, well, what is it you want to know? And I just, I want to know what it is you think I need to know and understand it. And then we spent about 3-4 hours driving around in his town and taking me all around hearing about his stories. And yeah, we ended up having dinner at his place at the end there. We were over fire making Johnny cakes and just learning about his culture. It was amazing, yeah. So it's just been open to it.
Yeah.
So for the development work that we do, we actually don't do a project without a local partner in the countries we work in. And that's adds a lot of complexity to the projects actually, but it's super beneficial because we have someone to introduce us, I guess primarily when we do travel. It actually means though we end up traveling less as well these days. Like which is definitely a trend in this sector. And that means the projects aren't as expensive. We don't have to, less environmental impact and that sort of thing. It actually means we can, and we end up training these local partners a lot as well. So building their capability to do this sort of design work. And so hopefully eventually we sort of design ourselves out of a job a little bit because they can do it without us, which is not good from a business sense, but that's the way the world needs to go a little bit as well. So local partners is necessary.
Singapore was a bit different. I think so. My team in Singapore was all Singaporean except for me. So I was the only non-Singaporean sort of in as part of the process. But in Singapore, sort of being the white guy from Australia gives you bonus points, and people will engage in the process because you're from overseas, so it must be special, and they're playing a special process. So there's a little bit of that going on, and we used to joke about playing the white guy card. So if my team was having a hard time and people were giving a hard time, they'd sort of wheel me out as like, for better or worse, and make it that what you will. But we played the political game that way. I think in terms of the, so for us, that the most sensitive part of this was getting into the low wage worker community and being accepted. It wasn't really our team doing that. We were trying to get the teams in the teams that were forming out of the network to do that. So we were giving them the tools of how to run a good user research interview, how to actually test a prototype in an open-ended way and not try and force it down their throat. So we were trying to give them those sorts of skills. And the group that we had actually had people who were low-wage workers themselves, and were introducing them to their colleagues, because I didn't say it before, but the makeup of the alliance was employers. We had CEOs and people in different sort of corporate expertise, which was quite beneficial. We had the unions, so they brought in a lot of the workers, and so they were workers who were pretty high capability in terms of organising and coordination, because they were coming out of the union movement, and so they were helping getting access out to their colleagues. So that we used to sort of open doors. And actually in the second round of it, we actually pre-recruited a whole bunch of low-wage workers out of the target sectors, because that was actually still the biggest pain point in getting the work done. So we had them pre-recruited so we could just get them straight into user research and interviews and not have any delay while they tried to recruit. So that helped.
Amazing. I guess I'll stick with you again then for my next question. I know you mentioned that obviously the government system over there, very different to how it is in Australia, sounds a little bit more stringent, as you mentioned, more hierarchical, so on and so forth. There's definitely people in the room here that have worked with government in a different capacity, but I guess what would your advice be coming from that environment to the people maybe working with the public sector over here that you had from, I guess, that particular project when dealing with those tougher?
Well, both civil services in Australia and Singapore suffer from the same hierarchical design, because they're command and control structures. As much as they try and do other things, they're still command and control. It's how it works. In Singapore, you've also got the overlay of a Chinese hierarchical culture as well. So you get like a bit of a double whammy. I think Singapore has the highest score for power distance of almost any society in the world. So it's quite ingrained, the hierarchy. And you've just got to accept that and not try and fight that too much. So there's a little bit of bowing and scraping that has to be done, and some observances that have to be made to get things to work. But on the other hand, Singapore is a very dynamic, the Singapore government is very innovative. They're willing to take risks. They do long-term planning in a way that we can't, because they don't have to worry about the electoral cycles so much. They don't have benefit. I mean, so I'm obsessed with democratic design. It's one of my passion spaces, but I think the Singapore democratic system allows them to do more stuff than we can a lot of the time. It's pros and cons.
So you're saying we need like a 20-year electoral cycle?
Not necessarily. A lot of that sort of argy-bargy happens behind closed doors, but it does happen. It's a very, they pride themselves on meritocracy. And so a lot of that policy debate happens furiously behind the doors. It's just, you don't see it splash out in the pages of the paper. Would you rather be responsive to the Daily Telegraph or the Straits Times? I know which one I'd rather be responsive to.
No, for sure. Rohan, I'd love to know, and I guess hear, with all these, I guess everyone that went through the training program, I know you mentioned there's a vision for them to potentially become their own country by 2027. Do you guys put in, I guess, the support system for what's going to happen afterwards so that this is sustainable versus maybe they're just getting the certificate and then it just dies off from there? So I'd just love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like afterwards for these people setting up their own businesses.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when our contract finishes, that's the end of our involvement essentially. So it's something we've been thinking about the whole way through, because it's a constant problem in the development sector where the consultant leaves and then everything just goes back to how it was before they came. So in this case, the idea, it's been well designed by UNDP. I think the concept is really sound. So the idea is these innovation hubs that they're setting up will actually be staffed and for years or for however long, but well into the future. And the idea is that our training course will be sort of continually taught through these innovation hubs. And when they're not being taught, it's actually a space for these business owners to come back together and be part of a community. So I think, so that's how we're hoping that it'll sustain itself just to some extent after our contract ends.
Amazing. And I guess for you guys as well, look, I'd love to learn a little bit more. I know you touched on it a little bit, but you spent 4 weeks with that community, almost similar. What's the long-term engagement going to look like for youth within the Walgett community? Because I know that sometimes youth engagement can be quite difficult, especially in the long term. So might go up in sort of on and off phases. Yeah, just love to hear a little bit more about that piece.
Well, I guess one of the positive things that the project did was really kind of lay the foundation for there to be more connection. So especially between the school and the youth group and the after school care. So trying to get kind of everyone on the same page. In terms of the long-term outlook, I think there's lots of things that will have to kind of change in within the system for it to be wholly sustainable. But I do think it's kind of laid the foundation for the network of people that want to make a change to kind of come together to make a difference for the youth there.
It's also, to be fair, we focus on this idea of long-term sustainable change or system changes if it's possible to do it in a project, or if any one person can do it, which is almost a point of, I think, ego in the sense of that you can do that. But and that's, to me, the fast way to burnout. Rather than going, what's the thing that we can create for someone who feels that they've contributed to something, and that's if someone can go away from they've contributed, they've had it, they've done today themselves to make different. We're talking intergenerational traumas and disadvantage and marginalisation. We'll give them one example of a small experience of where it doesn't have to feel that way all the time. That in itself is not going to be enough for, let's change the system, but it may just nudge in that first spot, and then the next person, groups, internal, external groups, got to can build upon that. So I try to bring it down to go, sustainability is not my goal, because I'll just be consistently feeling like a failure.
Beautiful, thank you. I guess now, yeah.
A question from Jake online, and Lee, I promise this isn't me speaking.
Yeah.
And it follows on from the last question, actually. So I'm interested to hear, as a designer, how you balance those expectations that a funded project might not be the solution that community stakeholders are hoping for, but to build capacity for community action or building something that is a piece of a bigger puzzle.
Yeah, look. So that everyone's trying to satisfy somebody else, right? You're trying to meet the needs of the person that pays the funding versus the voice that comes from the community and the space there. And to be fair, it's a choice of how authentic you're going to be to yourself and to your approach. And then how do you draw that back to what the primary purpose was? And to be fair, the primary purpose is our vocation and employment strategy. When and it's to the, you've got 3 people that complete year 12 on average per year, and that's just getting through. That's not passing. That's just that they stay at school long enough to be classed as completed out of what should be about 100. So that's a rounding error to 0%, and it's that's a failed state in our own backyard. So this idea of this strategy and all these are the opportunities. Well, we haven't got the first mile, let alone the last mile. So it really was drawing that back in, and we showed where the opportunities were, but our first thing went back to this idea of, well, if we don't have that relational capital, we don't build that trusting commerce, we've got nothing to build on top of it. And by having a demonstration project in the space that was open, when our clients came in, like the department, New South Wales, could actually see a community operating together, and a local business say, we have never had an experience like this in Walgett, and I've lived here my entire life. That carries a lot of courage. And so, in a sense, the recommendations will be forgotten in a week as they do it, I think, but the experience will be remembered, and it goes back to that. And that to me is far more important than what ability we can forecast what the employment opportunities are going to be in 2030. Mining. You've got the report that says that already. I don't know why. But so, Chelsea was like, but this is the first part. This is that what we're trying to understand. What's the bridging capital that we need to create there to achieve that?
I'll check in.
Yeah,
probably. And it was also not least specific, but it was along the lines of something we talked about earlier. So I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about specific communities.
Well, just quickly with the Alliance for Action, I think because it was one of the first times they were doing it, they set the bar pretty low, which was convenient for us. But realistically, they understood, and we'd set the expectation that it was primarily about getting people used to connecting and working together, and how to try and take one of their concepts and ideas through to something real. And if we could just get that as a habit that they were starting to get better at, then that would yield stuff in the future. The KPI, Singapore does love KPIs. The KPI was just to have 2 viable initiatives come out of the entire thing. So we had 10, we had a field of 10, and we were just hoping that 2 of them would come through, and they did. Possibly they would have massaged things to make sure that those 2 came out, which is the other part of KPI culture. But it did the job of getting the relationships formed and getting the ball rolling.
Over to the crowd.
Yep. Alexa actually is here and put 2 questions. Yeah. You can't all back and forth, mate. You might as well put your voice in the room.
It's like, okay.
Feel free to just yell them out.
So, okay, it's easier. About the PNG stuff, I'm just curious if the government was sensitive to what you guys do or any findings.
Yeah, well, that was really why we had the meeting. We called it a co-design workshop with the government while we were there, was to make sure that they were aware of what we were doing and on board with what we're doing, and also to give them some opportunity to have some input. But what we witnessed was actually UNDP have an extremely strong relationship with the government of Bougainville. So there was sort of at a higher level a pretty good understanding of UNDP is working to support Bougainville government.
It's only in relation to Papua New Guinea. I actually had quite a few years of my childhood there, and on the mainland though, and highlands. But when you started talking about like an entrepreneurial thing, the first thing that came to mind is the people that are there and established there now are already very self-sufficient, because they don't actually have kind of an economic system that drives it. They're self-sufficient, and also barter and other forms of exchange are very strong. Yep. Did you feel that you could talk about entrepreneurship in a way that didn't clash with their cultural norms? And I'm kind of asking the question in light of, for everyone here, apparently not making large changes, but sowing the seeds of change can often is the best thing anyway, because then you don't get the chance to tread on their own internal strengths or their current cultural model, and they get a chance to evolve themselves rather. But did you get to, you know, think about it in context of the current cultural norms?
Yeah, so I think it's, you know, we were trying to, like I was sort of saying, we were trying to make this course align with their sort of way of life, I guess. But I guess the way, like, the sort of first module of the course, right, was about the language of entrepreneurship and teaching just like what is an entrepreneur, what is a business model, what is a business, and just like defining these terms. And from what we sort of got, our feedback was that people were really engaged with that, and I don't think we saw, so whether that was by design or if it's by just where the country is at in its sort of culture, but I don't think we saw much sort of conflict there. People were really open to it and interested in it. Yeah, we didn't really get any. Didn't seem to have much conflict with the existing culture.
Yeah, whereas, for example, like I've heard that in some Aboriginal communities, when someone does well for themselves, they have to very quickly distribute the wealth amongst the community, which takes away some of the incentive for them. Whereas I know that the self-sufficiency and the barter, so like if you grow a few more pawpaw and get a few more dollars, there's a very immediate response in that culture.
Well, but to that point though, in the sense of an Indigenous community, so yeah, there is that notion of if one person will work and then everyone ends up with the money, but our system of employment only allows one person to have a job. So we looked at it, so with the community centre, we handed it over to Gary and his mob, and they didn't require a particular person to be there. It was like, whoever's here today is going to work with me. And so the idea of shared distribution isn't just the income, but actually we would naturally share the workload. And so we were actually looking at going, well, how could you prototype a way? So there's lack of employment, there's employment opportunity that jobs can't get filled. And it's like, well, actually this job could be done by any one of those 5 family members, but we can only employ one person. So why not employ a mob? We can even prototype it by a trust where they will take responsibility of having someone there every day, so others can deal with whatever cultural norms is also in the area. And it's certainly not this only money is shared. It actually would naturally fit if we could share the workload.
That's adaptive culture.
I just like I'm finding this really interesting because you guys are designing for people, for humans, and particularly relationships. And I think like looking at traditional design and kind of getting to know users for a platform or something like that is obviously really different to this. And obviously there's a lot of intuition that seems to be involved with this, and a lot of emotional connection. And I kind of am just interested in the mix between how you step into a place as a social actor, as an emotional actor, and as a human into spaces with the people that you're designing for. And then the more traditional design techniques that you used and how they interplay. So, you know, surveys and all that sort of thing, and maybe a little bit about the journey that you know, how do you use those different tools in combination with each other to really get to know people.
And are they that different, really?
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah. Well,
isn't that what we do?
Yeah. I mean, the sense is so high. Yeah. So, like, I think if you're designing for a marginalized,
you have to do different things to get the end.
They shouldn't be, but I guess
still building into it.
I think they might be, but they shouldn't be.
It's just interesting. Empathy isn't what we do. I think relationships is what we do, and it whether it's with we make the complicated part or the complex complicated, and then we try and build the solution without thinking about the relational component that underpins that. And you know, when we were out there the night that we got invited out to on at the Gary's land, and we had dinner. Now, could we bill for that? I mean, yeah, it was the most insightful evening and experience and learning from that. And I don't think there's any value in removing yourself from that. I mean, I think we spend too much time trying to remove ourselves from being as if we are human beings. We are not, there is no way to not have a bias, not to have an involvement and engagement in that space, and therefore embrace that, acknowledge that, and know what that is and be aware of that. But I just think you've got more chance of, and then we do step. When we come out, we're then reflecting back on it. I would say there's more reflective practice post that and going into that space with more awareness of I'm going to relate to these people and see what we learn from that, as opposed to trying to force an outcome.
What do safe to fail experiments look like in those two different contexts?
I think it's an experiment that isn't a safe to fail experiment. Every experiment that we looked at should naturally be designed to be able to fail safely. Otherwise, we're doing safe experiments that don't really look like we fail. We tell people again, oh, it wouldn't be good if you could learn if you had more collaboration. Boom. Well, thank you, but how about what would it look like to actually collaborate? And we then, okay, let's throw open a community meal, a dinner, and people just start doing stuff. Like the less artificial something is, the more natural, and it's all there. It's just, we had like in that space where we just opened the space that people could come and interact, and all of a sudden you've got people that would never sit in a room together getting along because it's outside that space that would normally be there.
So can I follow on from what was because a lot of Indigenous leaders are saying that we, particularly as a white man, need to adopt a more Indigenous mindset. So you've got a lot of things here with community-based which is one of the principles in Indigenous mindset. So is there anything from what you've learned in doing these sorts of projects that you think should change what we do in a corporate, private, which Western country?
Oh, yeah. I used to work at Wayside, and so we were working on mob space, and it was always like, the way you talk around a table and the way the way in which you communicate, and it's like, why don't we do that? I mean, is our hierarchical tables, how well is that functioning? We created silos, right? So it's, read things like Sand Talk by Tyson Yankapatora, who's a professor in Melbourne. Brilliant book. I mean, it is literally how Indigenous thinking can say the world. Indigenous systems thinking. We go, wow, what we've been doing is 40,000 years old. And the wisdom there. I mean, Walgett is the word is the meeting of two rivers. Again, it doesn't take a genius to think about the idea of Indigenous and non-Indigenous, two rivers meeting. What can we form out of that? I mean, the metaphors there, the metaphorical thinking, the storylines are all there. We would benefit from just thinking about how that works in there, even from strategic planning. About the idea of something that is regenerative by design, as opposed to not. I think we can learn a lot as a culture if we listen to all areas of wisdom.
Something to add on to that, something I've been thinking a lot about for a while. I think Indigenous kind of ideas really challenge human-centered design, where like humans are not the center, don't need to be the center of design. It's actually humans with the environment and the world and our country are actually all equal. And we think of it like humans shouldn't be at the center of that. And if they are, that's actually to our detriment. I think that's a really interesting shift. And I think that's personally, I think that might be where design is heading in the future, especially with the sustainable economy and circular economy, these sort of things is huge. Yeah. Yeah.
Post-anthropogenic, right? That movement's awesome. Post-anthropogenic, it's like, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that word custodianship. It is something that I do not own, but I am a custodian of it because it is for someone else. And it's just a simple way to, you know, again, the way that we talk about, let's not look at our roles as I am the head of this department or this. I am the custodian of this area, but others will contribute to it. My role is as a custodian, not an owner, and therefore I protect myself and my bit of turf. Little simple thinking like that can actually really reimagine how we might work together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really enjoyed all the chats and talks and sharing your programs and stories. One of the things that really stood out for me was each and one of you have a very deep understanding both from cultural and social psychology. Speaking of those disciplines, how would you say that social and cultural psychology, for example, inspire or influence this space? So how beneficial is that for you in this work?
So most of my work now is not called, like, we don't actually refer to it as like design work, we call it social and behavior change work. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the UN funded projects in the Pacific and globally are about shifting behaviors, and they don't look at it as a design project, even though what we're actually doing is still design. It absolutely is still design, but it's the terms have moved on now to be called social behavior change. And how we're sort of responding to that is combining design with like behavioral psychology and social psychology. And what that allows us to do is create interventions that are like not only designed for the people, but also with an understanding of how like human minds work, and then encouraging shifts in behavior. So it's entirely connected for me, at least in my work. It's one and the same.
Yeah, I come from the social work background, and most people say that social workers hate designers because you guys have better marketing. It's really, let's talk about we do this stuff day one. You guys just had IDEO and better marketers of the prototyping, but it really is, you know, and I've said, you know, I said, come in and go, can't get their heads around it, right? And either in the corporate sector and social workers go, oh, yeah, this makes sense. And it's because it's just that real understanding of your psychology, it's the understanding of your environment and all those other conditions that affect you, particularly the area that we're going now, which is that social design, that, you know, trying to challenge social challenges, as opposed to, I mean, look, don't give a social worker an industrial design job, it won't work. Now everyone will be driving Toyota Corollas, but you know, it's that human space is where they're thriving.
Would you say you're using a bit of a humanistic approach from Carl Rogers?
Yeah, look, I didn't go as far, but you know, you know, it's far more philosophical based. That, and then definitely it moves into psychology than it does. So it's more about a way of thinking about something, as opposed to we get technique becomes the thing, which is actually the most basic thing, as opposed to knowing how to go, being able to roll the space. Yeah.
Since it's on topic, Jake online has another question for the whole panel.
Jake again.
Jake's on fire.
Yeah.
You got it up in room. Jake needs to up his game. If you come up with and his yellow t-shirt and his profile pic too. If you come up with and you come up with a new term title for what you do as designers and social change without using the word design, what would you put on your business card? Which sort of just been. And he actually had that before we started on that thread. So
Great question.
Without the word design.
I studied design at uni, so I'm deeply up my side.
I can relate.
Yeah, like connector.
Yeah, connecting, yeah.
Yeah.
Just things you put on your business card.
Like, what else would be like? Yeah, like it's on the business card. You still like relator?
Curator.
Curator, that's true.
Curator.
or something around affordance creator. That's a wanky term, but literally it's creating opportunities. It's creating new abilities for things to happen.
I smell
Doesn't
a
have to be
design
designed.
that title.
I avoided serendipity.
And I'll be Alexa's voice since he put it on chat. He answered designing enabling environments. It wasn't on brief, mate. It's the word design. Enabling environments. Enabling environments. There we go.
Any more questions?
Maybe we should get to that.
I'm not sure what the question is, but it was just when Zoe was talking about access earlier, and it sort of got me, it reminded me of something I heard on the radio this morning about, and it was about Walgett. And it was something like, I can't remember, I was half asleep, but it was about something between 40 and 50% of the community of Walgett have concerns about their access to drinking water. We were talking about access to internet. And then you started talking about, and you and Sharon talking about, the themes of negativity, I guess, in the media. And that's what's just another negative story.
That's all you get out of Walgett.
And then you were talking about, a certain news outlet, and we have this political landscape now, which is all about, dividing and getting sort of, and weaponizing certain things that are going on, discussions that were going on around the voice and other things that are going on. I'm just wondering, you guys all had projects that were about bringing people together, but we had this landscape which is about, weaponizing and pulling people apart and dividing. How do you sort of reconcile that in your work you do?
We had people who didn't like what we did up there. Like we're not gonna say it was all Skittles.
Basically run me out of a building, what you didn't say to me was but you just have to.
It's the idea of that space where even the person that wants to run us out of the building, you're welcome here. If you want to, you will soon be by consistently being exclusive to others. When we create a place that's so inclusive, you isolate yourself, and it becomes the place. Your power you've lost your power. You've had this place-based power, and it actually redistributes it. And so all of a sudden we've got people who are coming there because it's welcome to everybody, and where they can actually no one wants to be at that perpetual state of anxiety and stress of who am I going to bump into. And in that space, we had 30 plus people, which is more than most places we get. And so it's like, I'm not going to be aware or respond just to that loud voice anymore. There is too many people who haven't been heard that want to belong in here, and all of a sudden they're the one. And so, but how do you fight the loud narrative of the media? That's a real hard one, because it's what makes the paper, right?
Singapore's almost the opposite problem, that there's been an undertone and an overtone of censorship at different points in its history. So it's really about what they're worried about. So the government's very committed, I think, to trying to increase citizen engagement around what they do. And they're trying to overcome a long culture of citizenry kind of does their thing and does what the government says, and in return the government will look after you kind of mantra. But that's all sort of starting to shift and change now. But they are, I think, trying to do it in a way that doesn't unleash Pandora's box and get arguably what we get, which is the decline in trust in democratic systems and these sort of slanging matches happening in public discourse all the time. So they have a much more controlled discourse. So we're actually trying to do the opposite in our processes. We're trying to create spaces where people can actually talk out loud properly and engage in reality with each other. And we did another Alliance for Action that was on the role that older people can play in after they retire with sort of either employment or voluntary activities. It's a bit of a loaded question, how they continue to contribute to society in their old age. So you can challenge that framing. But what was interesting is this cross-generational group that we were doing it with. And really, you can see the difference in the generations of where they'd come from and how comfortable they were talking about their opinions out loud. So we were really trying to create equality and a safe space for them all to be able to talk. And that was kind of key to what we were doing in all of these things. It's creating that safe space within the network, even if that's a closed system, and then stuff that's happening outside might be a bit different. But within the space that we're creating in that network, you can shift the way that the discourse is happening.
Right. Thank you guys so much. That is just our wonderful panelists. So we have Lee, we have Jen, we have Rohan and Bill. Can we have it one more time? Just because you guys think you're done with me, you're not. We have a few more announcements to make. So we do have establishing and scaling a kick-ass innovation design practice, which is next month. In which case you'll also be getting a book, which will be super exciting. And that's with Nathan Bard, who's really awesome. He's a great communicator. He's done a few different books. Really, really interesting work. And you guys should come along to that. The next thing we have Kylie, Kylie. We would like you to come up and talk to us about what on earth is this? What is that? SECNA, social enterprise. What is this? Tell us about this and what we need to know.
Thank you. Hello, for everyone I haven't met. Kylie, Flament, the CEO of Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales and ACT. Has anyone here heard of a social enterprise?
Nothing.
Jeez, less than half the room.
SECNA, so there should be lots of hands.
So the simple explanation is if a business and a charity had a baby, that would be a social enterprise. And I could stand up here for an hour and talk about capitalism and all the great and poor things it's done for people on the planet. But basically, social enterprise is a better way of doing business, using business as a tool for doing good. So 3 years ago, Ben and I and others set up a peak body for social enterprise. We've got about 4,000 social enterprises across New South Wales and ACT, and bringing all of these people who are doing business for good together. Blah, blah, blah. Long story. The thing that you need to know is Saturday, the 27th of May, we are holding a social enterprise festival at UTS Business School. So the Crumpled Paper Bag Building. So that is bringing together quite a few social enterprises that are already selling goods and services in New South Wales. So bring your friends, your families, your neighbours, your dogs. There's a dog, Rough Sleepers. You pay to have your dog cleaned, and they go and clean a homeless person's dog for free. There will be food, there'll be music. It'll be a really fun day, and you'll learn a lot and meet some of the amazing entrepreneurs behind some really cool products that are making the world a better place. So please join us for that. There's a QR code there, and otherwise hit Ben up for the details. Thank you. Saturday, 27th of May, UTS, 10 till 3. Oh, that's tiny, Ben. Who designed this?
Yeah. Escaping, we are going to the pub afterwards, but can we now have Susan? Can you come up here and tell us what your announcement is?
So for some of you who are regulars at Sydney Design Thinking, you might remember about 6 months ago, I stood up here and I innocently surveyed you about your opinions about the design community here in Sydney. Anyone remember that? A few people do. Okay, great. I actually had a real hidden agenda when I did that. It wasn't just intellectual curiosity, but we were actually bidding to host the Interaction Design Association conference here in Sydney. So we were bidding for it. It's the first time that Interaction Design Week will be held outside of either North America or Europe. So I wanted your data because we were involved in a show and tell about how great Sydney was. We did a pretty good job. We won it. And the conference is coming to Sydney on February 25th through March 1st next year. And we want every one of you to come. All you have to do is buy a ticket. It's really simple. We've got early bird tickets on sale at the moment. If you look at interaction24.ixda.org, you will find them there if you want to hit up myself or Ben. We are very much involved in the organizing of it. Ben is the co-chair of the Education Summit, which is a part of that. I'm the co-chair of the rest of it. And anyway, it's going to be a fabulous week, and it really is tied into the talks we've heard tonight in a really big way, because the theme of the conference is it's called Revisit, Reframe, and Regenerate. And I can't think of some better speakers that we are going to hit up than some that we heard tonight. So please consider joining us.
That's it.
And if you want to be a volunteer or sponsor, you can also go to the site and sign up to be one or both of those things too.
Awesome. And I believe we have one more.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
we get to have the beer.
Like the last, I got a very important message today from a very important person. That's Dai. I don't know if you remember her. She's the one who kicked Christina Keneally out of the Labour universe. Yeah. Anyway, so Friday week, she's organized an all-day forum, very relevant to all this, about cost of living and community thing, whatever. I think it's called. I got the message on Instagram. I haven't been able to find it, but I will send a link. I'll put a link to it on this meetup groups. So that's Friday week, all day forum, Warwick Farm, to do with community, cost of living, etc., by Dai. And if anybody wants to join me for a community free dinner tonight, talk to me. I'm going to a very famous soup kitchen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just go to look for Dai, DAI space LE on Facebook. Her Facebook page, her first post is how to sign up for the co-design workshop next week.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, guys, thank you all so much. As per usual, we'll be continuing the conversation at the pub.